Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for the second day of the quarterfinals in the FTX Crypto Cup. Magnus, Carlsen, Hikaru, Nakamura all tied up. Fabiano Caruana, Jan Nepomniachtchi, Anish, Giri, Timur Rajabov, Wesley So, Maxime Vacher-Lagrave. Before I jump into the recap of today's games and tell you all the results, today live on stream, we were raising money for coronavirus relief in India through CARE. And during the broadcast, we raised $435,000, a record by far. So before we get into the games, I want to tell you there's a link in the description. It's still open for donation. For those of you that haven't watched on Twitch, it's available for the YouTube audience as well. Timestamps on the video player. Here we go. But before I show you this game, I am going to verbally tell you what happened in one of the matches. This matchup between Timur Rajabov and Anish Giri had 4 draws. And therefore, I just want to give you that as a verbal appetizer. Timur Rajabov beat Anish Giri 1.5 to half. And you would say, well, why were there 4 draws? Well, Anish took 2 forced draws with black. He didn't fight at all, trying to put his money on winning with the white pieces, and he was unable to do so. So Timur is the first person to move on, and now I will show you this game between Wesley So and Maxime Vacher-Lagrave. They drew their first game, so it was half-half. Now this is game number 2 in their mini-match. We have d4. Maxime plays a move he basically never plays because he was not getting anywhere with Wesley's Berlin. And since Wesley has the win from yesterday of the mini-match, he doesn't need to do anything crazy today, so we have a London system. Okay, I've been seeing this quite a lot. It's not a big deal. c5, e3. And here the main line, overwhelmingly, is the setup with knight to d2, followed by pawn to c3. But we get knight c3, so kind of a Jobava fusion style, you know, knight b5, trying to get into c7. Wesley develops his bishop outside of the pawn chain. Now knight b5 just has rook c8. That's the whole idea, to cover c7. So bishop e2, Wesley plays e6, and Maxime doesn't even castle. He plays knight to e5. So knight to e5 opens up the pieces looking at each other. Wesley, just trying to be solid, trades, just brings his rooks to the center and plays all the natural looking moves. Now Maxime plays knight d3 and we trade bishop. So a bit of a weird structure already from the opening. It looks like Maxime's decision here is that he will take the potentially slightly weird position because he has to win. Okay, he has 3 games to win. He has to beat Wesley somehow. And so now Mr. Wesley doesn't just play solidly from this point forward, he actually just instigates. Now, how do you instigate in a position where both sides have 8 pawns? You play b5, and then you play a5, and then the queen side explodes, and by the time the queen side explodes, we get queen b6. The queen has arrived to defend everybody, so Wesley is taking a lot of space on the queen side before castling. So you're supposed to castle, but these grandmasters know that you don't have to generalize your principles, right? There's moments when you have to castle. Now he castles because that pawn is not going anywhere, and then he just goes and wins back the pawn. Now, white is worse. How do you know that? How is white worse? Material is the same, literally mirror images of each other. Queen, 2 rooks, 2 knights, a bunch of pawns, because of the weaknesses. White has much more targetable weaknesses than black. And that's kind of what Wesley just does throughout the rest of the game. He just goes for that weakness. Now, MVL can sit back and try to guard the weakness, or he can go for h5. Takes, knight e7, queen to c2, queen to a4. Wesley just super solid. Let's trade queens, buddy. You trade queens with me. I'm still going to come back. I'm going to stay on this weakness. Look at black's position. Black is like has a lot of space, but nothing is weak. This knight is not weak. It'll just move. So queen c1, queen a5, rook b4. I'm trying to block it out, but now knight c6. And it's just over because your rook is under attack. And MVL goes e4, trying to go queen g5. But Wesley just says, well, you want to play queen g5? So what? I just go here. And the craziest thing is this is a draw. Like Wesley could have in this position played h6 to prevent queen g5, but then we would have gotten queen f4, queen g4 anyway. But there would have been a way for him to play that position. Instead, here is just a draw. I mean, literally, if you play knight h5, if king h8, there is mate in 2. So it's a repetition. But Maxime plays this move, and then takes on d5, and it's still a draw, actually. It's still a draw, but it's still a draw, but it's still a draw, and then he plays this. He could have went back to f6 here, and tried to go for h7 and queen c5 check, and it's still a draw, but Maxime tries to, you know, beeline for a win, and that the knight is now no longer attacking the king, and one guy has 2 rooks, and the other guy has 1 rook and a knight. And so all endgames, of course, are going to favor the guy with the material. So the guy with the material makes a couple of forward moves, and, you know, Wesley proceeds to look for some pawn trades, for some piece trades. He safeguards his king. You'll notice that he's literally just shuffling back and forth, looking for a way forward, and not much has happened in the last 10 moves, but he ends up trading and rook b3, and I don't really know how to judge this game. Maxime just never really got going in this match, and I had a couple of people commenting on the recaps like, hey man, I'm from France, you've shown no respect to MVL, you only show games where he loses. MVL won a couple of very nice games. He beat Magnus Carlsen in the prelims, for example. Granted, Magnus Carlsen mouse-slipped on move 3 and played a slightly bad move, but yeah, he played very well. But this match was so weird because obviously round 3 was just a quick draw. Even with the, I mean, you know, MVL had the black pieces, it was just a very quick draw. And yeah, I mean, that's that. I can just make little dashes here. So Wesley just beats MVL 2-0. Well, there you go. So which takes me to my next match, which is the match between Jan Nepomniachtchi and Fabiano Caruana. Now, these guys are all tied yesterday, but their first 4 games today ended in draws. Very much like Anish, Giri, and Timur. However, they were fighting draws. Jan saved a couple of very bad positions, and so the score was 2-2. Now, the way the format works is that if it's all drawn after the rapid, you got to go to the blitz. Okay, you play 2 games of 5-minute with 3-second bonus blitz, and if that's all tied, you go to the Armageddon. 5 minutes for white, 4 minutes for black, no bonus time, and the person playing with the black pieces has draw odds, which means that if the game is at a draw, then you win. The person who chooses the color is the higher seed. Okay, so this is the first game of the blitz. We have c4, e5, a king's bishop English opening, and a big decision for black whether or not to play d5. And so Fabiano does play d5, but a little bit delayed. He builds up the pawn chain, being a connoisseur of Mr. Eric Rosen. And now we get cd5, queen d5, knight drops back, and Fabiano actually blunders something here. He castles. And you would really like to do this fork, but you can't because you will get en passanted. Shout out Anarchy Chess. So what do? Well, you get rid of the thing that can en passant you. He sacrifices a knight and plays d4, and now when the dust settles, white just has 2 bishops. Like, white is just better here because white has 2 bishops. Like, white is a lot better, actually, because you can just put the bishop out on the long diagonal, and black is just clearly worse. This is just kind of what happens when one guy gets a bishop pair very early. You see, Jan develops all his pieces. Now, Fabiano, granted, is still fine. I mean, he's not losing. He's got a nice little clamp on the position. Knight c4 tries to instigate, knight d7. And throughout this match, Jan has had his moments, but he was just giving Fabiano opportunities. Like, for example, here, bishop f7, now he attacks the center with e4. Knight c7, bishop d4, with pressure here, not on his own piece, pressure on this knight, with this and this lurking. Although he could have, in this position, played b4, which would have been a little bit more aggressive. But here, Fabiano plays knight takes b3, which actually is a very nice tactic. Because after queen b3, you are in the line of sight of this bishop. So, of course, how do you add pressure on the piece that's pinned, right? You play b5. Except b5 is a losing blunder. Fabiano should have played c5 first, not letting this go anywhere, and then b5. Why? Why? Let me show you. Because he played b5 first. And now you join your queen with your bishop, and when this gets taken, bishop c5 will win the exchange. And I think that right here, Jan saw that. He was like, bam, 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 bam. He missed probably c5, b5, but they both missed it. And so Fabiano, after the sequence, goes down in exchange. He's down rook for a knight and a pawn, but the problem is that Jan's got all the advantages of the breaks. And watch, as the game progresses, he trades on the queen side and just opens up the center. Everything that I just drew arrows to, it chops everything down, and in patented Jan style, he blunders. He forgot. I'm not saying Jan is blunder prone, but I am saying that sometimes Jan will go a little bit too fast. And there are opportunities in there for his opponents. Jan, if for whatever reason you are watching my recaps, I love you as a chess player. I didn't mean to offend you. So queen to d5 is played. Queen b6. Thing is, if you trade, the queen gets out of danger. And now, the knight gets out of danger. So Fabiano somehow transferred all his pieces out of danger, and his a-pawn is rolling. Now, rook for knight and 2 pawns, like a 2-pawn endgame, could be winning for the rook. Which is why, if you're going to trade pieces, you need to also trade pawns. Like, if the pawns come off the board, rook and knight don't beat rook and rook. So here, Fabiano can either take the queen or get his queen taken and bring the knight here. And there is a massive difference, and the difference is that the knight would hit the pawn. So if he played a4 and we got take, check, here, the knight takes, right? And it's knight and 2 versus rook and 1, that's a draw. Okay, you with me? Right? Good? Yes? Wonderful? Great. Fabiano took the queen. So when all of this happened, the knight is not there yet. And so the difference is that it's a tempo difference. That's the difference. And so rook a4 guards this, and now white is winning. And that's the problem with blitz. Sometimes it's a split-second decision, and this is actually very easily winning for white. You use your rook to check and force the king back, especially against the knight, and then you walk your king forward. So you give a check, you walk the king forward, and at some point you can simplify rook for knight or rook for knight and one pawn. Jan does it like this, by just walking the king down. Black just simply cannot move anything, because if you play something like h5, king d6, right, and you're dead. So king f8, king e6, and Fabiano resigned. And Fabiano in the next game had a very, very long rook end game that he was unable to convert, because in typical Jan style, just like he might blunder a little bit, he was super resourceful in defense, drew a really, really long rook end game. And so Jan eliminates Fabiano, and he moves on as well. So now we've got Nepo, and he will face Wesley So, and Timur Rajabov awaits our main event of the evening. Once again, I have saved for you Hikaru Nakamura versus Magnus Carlsen. We will begin in game number 1. Yesterday, they made 4 decisive results. White won every game. It was Hikaru, then Magnus, attacks, positional grinds, you name it. So today, we begin with e4, e5, and the usual. We have an Italian. We have bishop c5, castles, knight f6, d3, castles, rook e1. So yesterday we had a lot of h3. This time Magnus plays a slightly different move order, and Hikaru immediately jumps on him with knight g4, looking to attack on f2. Rook e2, and now you'd really like to play f5, but you need to get out of the pin, so you play king to h8. We've seen this a lot. So Hikaru plays his f5. By the way, look at that. Even at the cost of a knight. You ever seen that before? To open up his own position? This is too dangerous for white to allow all this. It's actually very well known, so we get this. The knight comes back to cover the queen. Here, d5. And we have a trade in the center. We have one more trade. We have one more trade. And we have the following position on move 16. What the heck is going on? Queen, rook, knight, bishop per player. Opposite-colored bishops. Opposite-colored bishops favor the person who wants to start an attack. Why? Because the bishop will target certain spots that the enemy bishop can't defend. So that's why you will have a piece attacking, but you might not necessarily have the same piece defending, because it can't defend the corresponding squares. Magnus has a pawn advancement potentially on the queen side, and Hikaru just begins to mobilize this way. Now at this point it should be noted, Magnus is also down a lot on time. On the moves queen d2 and b4 a4, he spent 10 minutes out of a possible 15. So he really didn't like his position all that much, and so what he did is he decided, I don't want Hikaru to attack me, so I am going to go find a queen trade. So he plays queen a2, here, queen e6, and Hikaru says, all right, now your queen's in with me, and I'm not going for a queen trade. I am now going to use your queen as a target. I will try to play h5 to kick out this stupid bishop. I will try to put my knight on f4 to kick out this stupid rook. My bishop will stay here to hit your stupid pawn. Everything's stupid, basically. So what does Magnus do? He takes on a5 and plays rook b1. Hikaru plays rook a7. Stubbornly defending and also pressure here in the future. Queen c4, queen g6. Now h5 is coming. Here Magnus plays a really wild move. He plays rook to b5, which on the surface attacks nothing. I mean, everything is defended. The computer here gave a move that was so ridiculous, knight d4. Moves that look impossible, right? That doesn't look possible. But the problem is that that would be a check and a loss of a rook. So in chess, when you can make an impossible looking move to then improve your position, you can get a very big advantage. That's why moves are impossible, right? So he didn't see it and played rook b5, and Hikaru goes to kick out his rook because he's like, I don't understand what you're doing here. And Magnus goes all in and plays knight takes e5, d e5, rook e5. He could have also taken the bishop and done this to fork And then that would have been better than what happened in the game, because I believe he missed Hikaru's defensive resource. He must have thought that the pressure here, along with queen d4 check, was a problem. But Hikaru has watched the danger levels video, folks. What's worth more than a knight? Besides every GothamChess subscriber. If you're not subscribed yet, come on, go check it out. A lot of people are always like, oh my god, I've been watching for so long, I didn't even think I wasn't subscribed. We're trying to hit 1 million. Let's do it, okay? What's worth more than a knight? The king. Rook d8. Look at that move. Leaving the knight hanging, rook d1 check, king h2, and there's a fork here, queen d6. The loose piece will fall off. So all of a sudden, Magnus Carlsen is losing with the white pieces. He begins to fight back. He safeguards his king, gets it out of danger, pushes the pawn in the center. He actually volunteers that pawn for capture because when the pawn is gone, the rooks will be connected, right? He actually wanted to do that, and now he goes for taking on b7. What is Hikaru going to do now? There are two ways to win in winning position, okay? I say this all the time. Trade the pieces down into a winning endgame, or use your material advantage to go on a belligerent attack. Step 1, trade one pair of rooks. Magnus creating counterplay on that side. Hikaru understands that he needs to push all the resources. Every pawn needs to go. Every pawn is getting involved in the game. Why? Because the opposite color bishops. So this g3 square, the dark square diagonal, keep that in mind as Hikaru begins consolidating, picks up the c3 pawn, and gets out. Look at that. Look at that active operation. Gets the pawn and comes back, makes the diagonal, and now, my friends, we've got this laser beam, so it's time h4. Everybody's playing in this game. Knight, queen, bishop, pawn, pawn, rook. I mean, the king's just, as long as you're safe, king. You stay being a beta in the corner, okay? Pawn takes h4, and now we're coming in. Knight comes back to g6. King to g2, bishop b6 hitting on f2. Bishop f3, knight back to the middle because you have no way to defend that. Now here Magnus Carlsen, the sly bastard, rook to d2. Look at that move. Oh no, my rook. Oh no, your beta king that you opened up, and now you are losing. You are losing the game, even though you are up a rook. You're up a rook, but my queen and my bishop will swarm you. It is never too late to lose the game. You know it. I know it. You know it better than me. So queen to c5. Here. And now, folks, we finish it off in style. Take the bishop, lose the queen, knight d2 check. And you pick this up. And now all you got to do is know how to mate with bishop and knight and not lose on time. And Hikaru coordinates his knight and his bishop, stops the a-pawn, and Magnus attacks the bishop, but gets his with knight d6, and Hikaru has won the first game with black. That is big. That is big. Which takes me to game number 2. Because now Magnus Carlsen has a very difficult decision. Does he stabilize with black and try to win the next game with white? Or does he go all in? Hikaru plays e4 and Magnus Carlsen plays c5, the Sicilian defense. This is not an opening that you play when you are looking to make a draw. Now Hikaru plays the bishop b5 check variation, very solid, and plays castles and goes for this setup. I know I'm going to skip a little bit, but the most important thing happens right here. This is a setup known as the Maroczy. I don't pronounce that right, and a lot of you guys criticize me. I don't know how I'm supposed to pronounce it, so I'm going to pronounce it like an American. Maroczy. So c4, e4, and essentially the structure that white gets is uber solid. Look, f3, little pyramid here to counteract this bishop. And Magnus has a structure here known as the hedgehog, the little spiky ball. You poke it, you might start bleeding. a6, b6, d6, e6. This is known as a little bit known as the hedgehog. Very passive, but it's like a slingshot. You know, you pull it back. All of a sudden, you get a broken orbital bone from a rock hitting you in the face. So b5, d5 are the pawn breaks. Knight e5, knight on c4 is a typical idea. And so Hikaru kind of invited it upon himself when he destabilized the knight from the rooks. And he knew he was thinking Magnus would go all out. So Magnus did, b5. If you take with the pawn, you lose your knight. So he sacrifices the knight for 2 pawns and attacks the rook. Now, any normal person here would think about the move rook to c6. But then knight to a7 would fork. And Hikaru doesn't have to do this. He can force a draw. He can also take on c8. He can, and then push his pawns. And probably he is better. But here, Magnus Carlsen played a move that, if I gave you 10 guesses, you wouldn't guess. But now that I'm saying that, you'll probably guess it immediately. What do super GMs do when they're bored? They don't know what to do in a position. h5. So Hikaru says, well, whatever you can do, I can do better. a4. We're playing the mirrored crab. Magnus says, all right, I guess I gotta address the situation on the queen side. I don't really like that pawn coming at me. h4. Hikaru says, bro, let's go. Okay, from this point forward, it begins to look like a guess the elo game. H3! Trying to get Hikaru to take, so his structure is destabilized. Hikaru just plays rook a1, allows the h-pawn to walk down the board, and just continues ignoring it and plays knight c7 and b5. Now, b5 is a big decision because you are committed to your pawns walking, but Magnus, meanwhile, is going to get the c5 square. Hikaru could have just played a6 and left the pawns here, but also, along with knight c5, what's the one pawn move that's going to open things up for Magnus? It's the move d5. It's going to open up the queen, it'll shatter the center, it'll open the c-file, it'll open the bishop, the knights get into the game. And ladies and gentlemen, here we go. d5 on the board. b6 attacks the queen. Queen e5 attacks the queen again. Queen slides in amongst everybody. Hikaru goes for a queen trade. Magnus says, no queen trade. I have 8 minutes. You have 1.5. No queen trade, just like last game. The top guys, they know what they're doing. They will put that pressure on the clock, especially when they have a big time advantage. So now Hikaru plays bishop a4. Magnus jumps in with the knight. The pawn goes out to a6, connected past pawns on the 7th rank. So we sacrifice the bishop for both of them. But the problem is that black still has really active pieces and this pawn is lurking. And this pawn's going to play a pivotal role in this game because now we have bishop c5, trading off another very important piece. Hikaru brings back the rook to target the queen. Brings back the rook to target the queen. Look at that move. Look at queen f1. Magnus Carlsen says, let's calm it down. Let's calm it down. It's a crazy tactical position. But the endgame is better for me. I got the 2 knights. I have connected pawns. Use that pawn. This pawn became a queen. Believe in yourself. Here. Knight d3. Here. Here. And this is really a tough endgame. Maybe in classical chess, this is borderline, very borderline holdable, but probably not against Magnus Carlsen. And in blitz chess with 20 seconds on the clock like Hikaru had, you just can't do it. Because the problem is your pawns are too weak. Magnus has the 2nd rank coming in. Not right away. He's not going to lose his rook in one move. But Hikaru sacrifices and sets one trap, bishop d7, which looks like you are getting pinned. But then there would have been this stunning move, bishop f5. It's never too late to blunder back rank checkmate, yeah? You take both things and then the king can't escape. That is not what happened in the game. Magnus took the bishop, now has knight and 3 pawns for a rook, and that's all he needed. His king walks out, he defends all his pawns, and the game is over right here after knight to f4. I think Hikaru might have made a move and resigned, but yeah. Very, very impressive game. Very impressive match. 6 straight wins to start things off. 2 with the black pieces. Now, folks, let's take a deep breath. Rounds 7 and 8 of their rapid portion were relatively effortless draws. Magnus did begin the second game he had white with the move b4. He didn't really get much from the opening. He blundered later, but it ended up just being an equal endgame. So, my friends, it's 2-2, and it's time for blitz. Now, Hikaru is the higher seed of the two, so he opts to play with the black pieces first. And now Magnus changes everything. No more e4, he plays d4. Knight f6, c4, e6. Now, Hikaru is a predictable man because he will play this Queen's Gambit declined. He plays it all the time. e3, he will play knight to d7, and his whole point is that he will suffer with the slightly worse spatial situation and then use the queen side to break. He plays this a lot. They've played this a lot. So Magnus says, all right, I'm not going to play option 1 or 2 or 3. I'm going to go deep into the rabbit hole. First, I'm going to begin with bishop e2, dc4, and now I'm going to castle. I'm not even going to take back the pawn. I'm going to let you make a decision now. Knight b6. You can also play knight d5 in this position, which is one of the moves. Knight b6, a4, a5. e4. Go ahead. Hang on to your c-pawn, but you're not going to get developed anytime soon. It's going to be tough for you to develop. At this point, there's no games played in the database. Magnus is smart about his preparation. He gets Hikaru out of it takes a risk that he won't remember the line. The best move here, I believe, is bishop to b4, targeting the knight and trying to win this. But then Magnus would maybe play queen c2, bring his rooks. Hikaru doesn't play the right move. He plays c5. The idea is simple. You want to use the c-pawn to trade the center, but that allows this nagging move. Your c and a pawns normally can fend off the knight, but because they've went too far, now bishop c7 is threatened, you have to play knight back to e8. So Magnus takes on c5, knight comes to d7, now he gets the situation right here. To a grandmaster, this position is almost completely winning for white. Why? Because of one plan and one plan only. Do you trade queens? Are you open to a queen trade? No. When you have a lead in development and more space, don't trade pieces. Queen to c2. And so they both move their queens out. Now there is one move in this position and one move only that guarantees white an advantage, my friends. It's very subtle. When you watch Magnus do it, you're like, oh, duh. That's what Ceci says. That's what the computer says. It's very important to use this pawn move as a thorn to remove your opponent's pieces from being active. e5. You might think, I haven't moved my rooks yet. That's not the priority. The priority is to shut down the circulation of black's position and line up to h7. You're threatening knight g5, bishop d3, or as Magnus plays in this game, bishop a2 and bishop b1. Look at that maneuver, lining up to h7. Hikaru cannot defend this. He has to play f5, and now, for the second time in a row that he's had an opportunity, en passant by Mr. Carlsen, of course, to keep this open. Now, when Hikaru played f7 to f5, what got weakened? The light squares near the king. So we add bishop e5 and we're ready with knight h4, knight g6. And Magnus, smart man, doesn't continue improving his position, realizes, what's my most forcing move here? I have one check, that loses this guy. So bishop f6. Now, knight f6 it looks forced, but I can also do this. The queen is not mate. Very simple move here. The only piece that's not involved, rook e1. And the laser beams down the center of the board. Rook takes d5 is coming. ed will lose the queen. Hikaru saw that, played queen g7, but just queen takes bishop. And Hikaru resigned. The truth is that this is basically already lost. You cannot defend all the pieces. You cannot defend against all the threats. And Magnus Carlsen wins a very nice game. Credit to the man for completely going away from their entire series of openings, playing d4, and taking a little sidestep, and then another sidestep, and catching Hikaru off guard in this kind of Queen's Gambit decline structure, and just e4. Nagging position. Very annoying position. Very common. I made a video recently about the computer influence on Magnus Carlsen. This is very standard nowadays. Lose a pawn in the opening, dominate the center, win that pawn back in the future, and if your opponent doesn't react perfectly as Hikaru did in this game, very convincing win. Magnus Carlsen up 3-2, and that takes us to the final game of Blitz. The final game of Blitz. e4, e5, Hikaru's got to win. Plays knight f3, knight c6. Okay, bishop b5, knight f6. You got to offer the Berlin if you're trying to make a draw. d3, no Berlin. And c3. c3 prevents knight d4, which is what they played in one of their draws. Castles, castles, d6. Now, again, it's an e4, e5 position, so for the first kind of stage of the opening, the players are shuffling their pieces. And probably the most important moment is right here. This is move 14. Nah, one more move. Let's get the pieces out. Move 15. How do you beat a guy in an e4, e5 position? Every piece is still on the board. Every single piece is still on the board, guys. So I don't really know what to do. If you trade a pawn in the center, you give your opponent central majority, potentially. Not at the moment, but, you know, bishop d5 is very strong on f3. Knight d5 is coming to f4. So Hikaru tries to keep as many pieces on the board as possible just for the long term. He plays queen to f1. Not the prettiest move, but necessary. Magnus, meanwhile, lashes out with b5. Get that guy out of here. I want all your pieces to be passive. Queen c7. Now Hikaru decides to take on d5, cd5, d4. So again, e takes d4, runs into c takes or knight takes, looking to create some degree of imbalance in the position. But remember the really important move last game that Magnus played to take dominant control in the center? In chess, it's all about patterns. e4. Now this is open, and that bishop is going to go to b8, just like last game. So now Hikaru kind of turns his attention to creating a dark squared blockade. So he's going to play queen e2, knight f1, knight e3. So we have queen e2, knight f4. Let's get rid of that knight. It's a little bit annoying. And bring back my knight to go here. When the knight comes here, I'm going to have maybe pressure on d5. I'll play f3 or something. But the bishop on b8 is really strong. What are we going to do about that? And Magnus brings it forward a little bit. Eyeing over here, connecting the rooks. Maybe a rook e7, maybe rook f8. Plays bishop f4. No queen trade. Rook c8. Knight e2. Let me get that bishop. No bishop for you. I'm going to move my rook over, bring the bishop back, and Hikaru's going for a queen trade. He goes for a queen trade. Queen trade actually would be very nice. No. Even though all I need is a draw, I'm not interested in making a draw. I'm interested in playing the best move in the position. King to G1. Now, Magnus once again plays a very nice move. He just improves his position. One more of his pawns needs to join the attack. That's not a pawn, but that is. And so now he plays F5. They trade. Hikaru goes for the open file. F4. And a couple moves later, Hikaru has to play F3 because otherwise F3 would have happened for black. And this wedge you are not going to overcome. Queen D1. And when the position is all but perfect, sometimes there is a lurking sacrifice to shred it all open. Magnus plays bishop takes H3. Rook G6. Bishop C2. Takes on C2 and Hikaru resigned. He resigned because even though he can take back and he's only down one pawn, a rook is hanging. That's the problem. And by the way, let's just say you don't, let's just say you play like King H8. You cannot overcome this. This is just too dominant of a structure here. Now, Magnus Carlsen eliminates Hikaru with two very convincing blitz games. We talked to Hikaru afterward when he joined us on his channel, and he felt like it all got away from him in that second game. When you win with black in the first game and Magnus goes all out in the second game, you have to stabilize. You have to not lose. And when they just trade the blows, it's match on again. And, you know, it felt like in these two blitz games, I don't know, everything kind of shifted. Magnus was just super locked in, and he just won 2 games very convincingly. What more can you say? So Magnus wins 4-2 and wins the overall match 1.5-1/2. He will move on to take on Timur Rajabov. Timur is not going to be able to make 7 out of 8 draws and still win the match. And Wesley So will take on Jan Nepomniachtchi. The winners of those 2 matches will then take on each other. The losers will play for 3rd place. My friends, it has been a pleasure covering Hikaru versus Magnus for you here in the quarterfinals. We have our semifinalists now. Whatever the hell the price of Bitcoin is now, the players still get about 2.2 of it as a prize fund. And yeah, once again, friendly reminder that if you want to donate to coronavirus charity relief, I hope we can get to $500,000 raised. We're at 435,000 at the time of recording, and I believe in this community. And if you have the means to donate, let's help India out with their COVID crisis. That's all. That's all for me. I will see you all tomorrow. Take care, and stay awesome. Get out of here.